We are 7th graders from Woodlands Community Temple in Greenberg. We are interviewing our fellow Temple member, Andrew Bordwin, who will be telling us about his mother, Henrika.
We are conducting this interview in order to understand the Holocaust and hear real experiences.
Thank you for meeting with us, Andrew. Can you start by giving us a general sense of your mother's story?
Whoa, that's a general sense. So my mom, her name is Henrika, like you said, and she was born Henrika Mia Vissel, Vissel, and she was born in a town just east of Amsterdam in the Netherlands in 1928. She's the middle of three children. Her father was the second to youngest of 10 children from a family of shopkeepers and butchers from the north of Holland, a town called Groningen, which is spelled with a G, but they say it with a G over there, like a chet. And her mother, her mother's family had been in Amsterdam since probably the early to mid 1600s, so for a very long time. She was born in 1928, yeah, I mean, any other questions besides that? I mean, she was just a normal school kid, you know. She was when the war broke out in 1939, and then the Germans subsequently invaded the Netherlands, and Netherlands surrendered in May of 1940, she was just 11 years old, 11 and a half. So up until that point, she had a sort of a normal childhood for a kid about your age, maybe a little younger than you guys, but she was just living life as a young girl in late 1930s, early 1940s Netherlands. Yep.
And did she like Netherlands, like before the Nazis came?
I mean, did she have I think she had a relatively happy childhood. I mean, she, it's just the normal stuff. Her brothers probably teased her a little too much. She didn't like having big birthday celebrations, and her dad would insist on getting a big calliope that he would park in the lawn in front of their house. So she was, had all the ups and downs of a childhood, a normal childhood. I don't think she ever said anything. They used to go camping, particularly in Denmark. They go to Denmark. She didn't like camping. She was more bookish. I mean, to be honest, it's like it's an interesting question because I don't think I have as full an answer as I'd like to give. Like, what was her childhood like before things changed? So, but that's about all I can kind of bring to mind. An older brother and a younger brother, so there was a certain amount of teasing.
What was your mother's experience during the war?
So, like I said, my mom was about 11. She was born in September of 1928, so she was 11 when the Netherlands surrendered to Germany on the 15th of May, 1940. And there was a last transport. So there was a point where Jews were the laws regarding Jewish life and the treatment of the Jews was starting to clamp down long before that. My grandfather was a teacher. He was an author. He was a playwright and a teacher, and he was not allowed to continue teaching at the school he was at. He had to switch to an all-Jewish school. The rights of Jews to own businesses. I think there's a lot of stuff that the rights of Jews to own businesses, to conduct business, to own property was changing. Property was starting to be confiscated, things like that. And there was a fairly big exodus of Jews from a lot of countries, particularly from Germany and then from Poland. But a lot of people could not get out. And the last transport out of the Netherlands was in May, right before the surrender, in May of 1940, and they couldn't get on that. They couldn't find their way onto that. So what do you do? What do you do when your family is you're a mother and father, you have three kids, ranging in age? What do you do when severe murderous danger is looming? So my grandfather was a conscientious objector in World War I. What that meant is that he refused to fight, and he was in jail because of it. And he just didn't believe in fighting in the war. And during World War II, he actually reconnected with a lot of people he met at that time during World War I, because my grandfather was born in 1890. So people in my family tend to have kids a little on the older side. So for me to be sitting here and say my grandfather was born in 1890 is a little weird, but he was. So he had all these connections to people in the underground, in the resistance, right? So there was this underground network of people that he tapped into when it became clear that he needed to find a way to protect his family. And I was talking about him a lot because my grandmother she was a textile designer, she was basically an artist, and she didn't have these same connections, and she didn't have the same military obligations that men would have. So she didn't have the same connections that my grandfather had. Long story short, through several connections, he found a farmhouse in the countryside of the Netherlands, in an area called Friesland. If you've heard of Frisian cheese, Frisian dairy, Frisian cattle. So that's where it's from. It's basically it's the dairy capital of the Netherlands, and the Netherlands makes a lot of great cheese. So they have a lot of cows and a big dairy industry. So this area called Friesland, there was a farmhouse that he found through all his connections, and the owner of this farmhouse agreed to hide my family there. So they found their way separately. They couldn't travel together. And my mother had a whole series of connections in places she had to stay, like safe houses on her way to getting there. It was very, very dangerous to travel as a Jew at that time. And they converged on this farmhouse. The details of how she got there are sketchy to me because I've talked about it, I've interviewed her, I videotaped her, but I can't really recall the exact stops. But the point being is they ended up at this farmhouse. And they were hidden in that farmhouse from the summer of 1940 until toward the end of the war. While they were at this farmhouse, they had plenty of food. They had a moderate amount of freedom. My uncle, her younger brother, my mom's younger brother I think he was 8, maybe he was 7, but he ran around, he made friends. He could live in the countryside, a sort of a normal life, and he wrote a book about it. There was a small garrison of soldiers, German soldiers nearby, but they didn't care. They just basically were like, I don't care if you're Jews or not. I don't want to fight in the front. Leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. And so there was this mutual tolerance. And they lived there. My grandfather continued to teach them as much as he could from memory, because he was a teacher. And my mom had a pet goat on the farm. And at a time of great hunger in Holland, they had a lot of food. They had enough food. I don't know about a lot, but they had enough food. I'm still in touch. I'm in touch with the great nephew of the man who owned that, who hid my family. We're friends. He's a dairy farmer, and he's 6'7", and he stayed at my house. And he has the same name as the man who hid my family. So it's an interesting name. It's Chalke Albada. Chalke is Tjalke, which is a classic Frisian name. It's a very medieval sounding name. And Albada, Albada. His name is also Chalke. And at the end, in 1940, end of 44, winter 44, 45, their luck ran out, and either they were betrayed by some neighbors who observed too much garbage coming out of the farmhouse. There's more stuff coming out of the farmhouse than for one person who supposedly lives. This is like a family's worth of refuse. But either way, soldiers came knocking, and in the winter of 44, 45, so probably December, I want to say, and there was a hiding place inside the farmhouse, which was actually a hole in the ground big enough to hold a person. And my mom thought that was for her because she was the girl. I've learned from my cousins that it was probably more from my older uncle because he was of fighting age and he would have been taken to the Russian front and he would have died probably. So my uncle Jaap, his name was Jaap, J-A-A-P, he jumps in the hole. They cover it up, the soldiers come in. My grandmother's lying on a couch. She doesn't feel well that day, she's sick. And my grandfather tries to strike down one of the soldiers with an axe, and he ends up getting a rifle butt in the face. My grandmother says, "You can shoot me here. I'm not going with you because I feel like crap. I'm sick, so leave me alone." And they left her there, and they took my mom, and they took my grandfather, and my older uncle, and my younger uncle as well, Nico. So the three of them were taken away, and my grandmother was left, and my uncle Yap is underneath, which leads us to your question: what did they do? What did my grandmother and my uncle do while the other three members of the family were away? The answer is I don't know. I presume they stayed in the farmhouse. Everyone involved is no longer alive, so I can't ask them. And I didn't have, I didn't get clear answers from them while my mom, while she was alive. But my mother, this is the point where my mother, her father, and her younger brother were taken to a camp called Westerbork. Westerbork is a transportation camp in the Netherlands. And all the Dutch Jews that were transported later to concentration camps went through that camp, including Anne Frank, right, who you've heard of, right? But all the Dutch Jews who were transported to concentration camps like Auschwitz or Sobibor and like that, they went through Westerbork. By the time my mom and her dad and her brother were there, the transports had ended, and they were in the camp for a matter of months, and they were liberated on the 12th of April, 1945, by the Royal Canadian Army. So that's the overview, but it occurred to me a year or two ago, like, what did my uncle and my grandmother do this whole time? Because at the end of the war, everybody walked back to Amsterdam. They couldn't afford anything. There was no gasoline. They couldn't get on a train. Whatever the case, they didn't have any money. So they just walked, and they reconverged back on this house where my mom grew up, and they apparently still owned that house. So that's a long answer to a short question.
How did your mother's experience shape the way she lived the rest of her life?
Well, it's interesting. That's also a really good question. So my mom met my dad in Vienna, and that's a whole other story, in 1955. My sister was born in Germany in 56. They moved back to the States in 56. When my mom came back to the States with my dad and my sister, my baby sister, she encountered Jim Crow. She encountered racial discrimination against Black Americans. And she had no idea what was going on. She didn't know about this, right? She just came from an environment where there was massive, hateful, terrible discrimination and murderous discrimination against Jews. And now she moves to this country that was the great liberator, that had won the war, that had liberated Europe. And she sees this is how they're treating their citizens. So her experience, she immediately became involved with the civil rights movement. And she's a musician, so she volunteered playing concerts at Freedom House in Roxbury, Massachusetts. That's where I grew up. That's where they moved. Stuff like, we used to have a subscription to Ebony magazine when I was growing up, which is for middle-class Jewish families, kind of a funny thing, because the segregation was really intense in this country, and it still is in a lot of places. And she was horrified by it. She thought it was unconscionable. She thought it was absolutely terrible, which it is. So she wanted to do something about it. So the first thing that comes to mind to answer your question is that. She took her experience and she tried to map it onto doing something good for other people. Other than that, she just made a point of witnessing and making sure that we remembered and understood what she went through. And it's a weight to carry. It's also an honor to carry it. But then I have to figure out how do I pass that on to my kids without weighing on them too much, but weighing on them enough to make it land what their heritage is. She also didn't have a great trust of the human race. She liked dogs better than people. She didn't like human beings very much. She thought that they were really terrible to each other, and yeah. She also didn't like being around big gatherings of Jews. It made her very uncomfortable. So going to shul, going to synagogue was not I mean, we went to high holiday services, but she wasn't wild about it. It made her ootsy, you know.
When did you first learn about your mother's experience?
I can't remember a time I didn't know about it. I just can't remember a time I didn't know about it. So here's an interesting thing. I'm going to show you guys something. This is, and there may be pictures. I brought some pictures because I was asking Rabbi Mara, what should I bring? These are two young Dutch men, and I'm named after these guys. And one of them is named Andre Hulen, and the other one's name is Jaap Hulen. My name is Andrew Jack. So I'm named after Andre and Jaap, which in English would be Andrew and Jack. And these are the children of my mom's family doctor, the guy who basically lived near them and was a friend of my grandfather's and probably delivered her, and I think probably delivered her brothers as well. These are the family doctor's sons. They are devout Catholics. We're devout Catholics. And when the war broke out, they went underground. They got involved with a mission to basically a creche, like a nursery school for kids that was doctoring records, taking names out of records of who's attending, what little kids, babies, are part of this nursery school slash daycare center, basically, taking the names out of Jewish kids. So they're disappearing their names from the record, and they smuggled these babies out. They smuggled out probably about 500 babies. And then they were caught, and they were sent to a camp called Mauthausen, and they died of typhus. But I'm named after them. So I can't remember a time this is like, it's my name. So these guys were extremely brave, and they're what you call the righteous Gentiles, right? And that's an inspiring story. It's a terrible story, but it's a very inspiring story because they displayed a tremendous amount of bravery, and they saved a lot of lives. And I have a couple books about that too, and a lot of those babies are still, they have grandchildren at this point. So.
How did your mother's experience impact your life?
So I would say there's that whole story about who I'm named after. That definitely is carrying that with me has impacted me because it's a name I carry. Those are names I carry. But I think the way her story is a product of seeing just how cruel human beings can be to each other, and just how far into a dark place governments can dive, how bad a situation can get, right? So from the beginning, even as long as I can remember, I've always kind of judged, for instance, what I've seen presidents for decades do in this country against what I know to be the potential for a downward spiral. Basically, it just kind of made me realize on a very gut level that things can go really bad in ways that you can't necessarily predict. So, it makes you think, what would I do, especially recently with issues with, the treatment of immigrants. I've had some serious thoughts about whether I would take people into my house, and I thought, without hesitation, I would. But these are not thoughts, these are things that I thought about long before these days. These are, basically her experience gave me a really intense reference point for how to judge the situation, any given situation on any given day in our country or around the world. It's a very powerful reference point to have in that judgment, sort of internally. I hope that answers it.
How did your parents meet?
So after the war, my mom was, as you can imagine, she was traumatized, and my grandfather, her dad, and her mom wisely found a way to get her some psychological counseling, kind of get her through this period. Her brother was younger. You know, my mom basically entered the war at 11 and came out of it when she was, 16. So all those years where you want to have your teenage years, a lot of them were taken up by this. So she needed really to regrow and heal. And she discovered in that process that playing music was a really healthy thing for her. So she started playing the piano, and she loved playing the piano, and she immediately took to it. So fast forward to 1953 or 54, she started studying the music at an academy in Amsterdam, and then she got accepted to an academy in Vienna, Austria, and she moved there to study and get a graduate degree in music and performance and musicology. And so she is, what is she? She's 27 at this point, something like that, if I'm doing the math right, 26. And while she's living in Vienna, which at that point was divided between 4 countries. It was after the war still. War ended in 45. This is 1955. So 10 years later, Vienna was divided into a French quadrant, a British quadrant, a Soviet quadrant, and an American quadrant, sector, right? So she was studying I believe in the American sector. But my dad was stationed there as a private in the U.S. Army. He was sent over there in the military as part of what's called the GI Bill. The GI Bill was something that President Roosevelt did to help soldiers pay for college. So if you enlisted in the Army, you could get money to pay for your education and your housing while you were getting your education. So he was over there doing his time in the U.S. Army. She was over there studying piano and giving lessons to make some extra money. She was giving lessons to young kids, children of officers and stuff. And my dad decided that he wanted to learn how to play the piano, and somebody in his unit said, oh, there's this woman giving lessons, you should meet her. And he took a lesson with her. And I don't know if he took more than one lesson, but they were married a few weeks after that. So they got married, less than half a year after that. They were married, more like 3 months or something. They won't tell me. They refused to say, because my sister was born in 56. She was born probably, 10 months after they met. So, and my sister was born in a military hospital in a town called Bad Kreuznach in Germany. And then they all moved back to the United States, where my dad was studying in law school. So that's how they met. She gave piano lessons. So music has always been in there. It was always in their relationship. And she was a musician and a teacher her whole life. And that's how they met. It's kind of a cool story. And they eloped. They didn't have a wedding. They just drove someplace in the Netherlands, and they got married by somebody and told their family the next day. So.
What values did your mother impart on you as a result of her experience in the Holocaust?
I think I kind of touched on some of that. I think she placed a great value on kindness and character. Bravery is the thing you do, means you're frightened, but you do the right thing anyway. Nobody's not frightened, everybody's frightened. But yeah, I think she was just interested in a good work ethic, hard work, getting a good education, and being kind to other people and respectful of other people. She saw a lot of cruelty in her life, so she wanted kindness more than anything, I think.
If your mother was here with us now, what do you think her message would be for us?
Sit up straight. She was also a real character. That's the other thing. What would her message be? I don't know. I think a lot of the things I've already mentioned. It's interesting. I'm a little stumped by that. I know, what does it mean to live a good life, you know? It's like trying to answer that. It's a hard one to answer. Consider me stumped. It's a hard one to answer. But I think other things have answered, perhaps a little bit. But she was, you know, she spoke her mind. I mean, she had no filter. So she didn't really care what people thought of her. She said whatever she wanted. A bit of that has rubbed off on me, and it's gotten me in trouble sometimes, but I like it that way. So.
Do you have a message for us?
Oh, God. Spend time with each other, not looking at screens, because the only thing that really is going to make difference is what you do with each other. Build friendships that matter. Friendships are probably the most important thing you'll ever have. It's the most valuable gift you can have is a friendship. I'm still friends with my friend Niels. I've known since we were 5. And that's priceless, right? So build those connections. I think a big part of the reason why I'm sitting here is because my grandfather had a social gift. He had a joy for life, but he also really enjoyed the company of other people. He didn't have the same technology that you have today, but at the same time, regardless of that, he built social connections, and I think friendships and social connections are incredibly valuable. So that's one thing I would say. Don't be distracted by. I mean, look, you guys are like 13. You're gonna, have a good time, enjoy life, but also understand what's serious, understand what matters. Take time to be sincere. Don't. There's a lot of cynicism today, I think, and sarcasm, and people are afraid to really get real and be sincere. Don't be afraid to do that. And besides all the other stuff that your parents tell you to like work hard and never let a school get in the way of a good education. That's what my mom used to say. But yeah, I think it's a really important time. I'm seeing a lot of, my biggest concern, my kids now, Rabbi Mara introduced them a little bit, but they're 23 and 26. One lives in Brooklyn, the other lives in Japan. And, dealing with a lot of distraction that's happening today because of, you've heard it a million times, and I know it's tired, but like social media and stuff and screens, it's a problem, trust me. It's a real challenge. And you can't imagine a time before it, but believe me, there was a time before it where you just like call someone on a phone and say, I'll meet you in this corner at this time. I would reinvigorate your one-on-one human connections and try and have genuine experiences, authentic experiences that way. But that's a question every day you ask me that question, I'll answer it differently, I guess. But those are important things, I think.
How did your mother's relationship with Judaism change before and after the war?
Okay, that's a question. So the interesting thing about Jews growing up in Europe, a lot of them, they were primarily, like my mom's family considered themselves Dutch first, but Jewish first also. So it was kind of a both thing, but they were, proud to be, they were Dutch, right? Just like you hear about German Jews saying we were Germans and we never thought that, anyone would treat us any differently. So she didn't really know, I mean, this is a heartbreaking story, but she didn't know, she was very young when she found out she was Jewish, and she found out because, she was maybe 9. And, she knew beforehand. I mean, she definitely knew beforehand, but she had it sort of cemented for her when a kid threw a snowball at her with a rock in the middle of it and called her a bad name, a Jewish slur. So that was after the war began. It was probably in 1939. So she was maybe 10. But she knew she was Jewish, and she had, clearly, and she also had a strong identity on both sides because both my grandparents were Jewish and they come from a long line of Jews, and the Jewish community in both places they grew up was quite strong. Amsterdam had a very strong Jewish community going back to around the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, if you've learned about that. In 1492, the Jews were kicked out of Portugal and Spain, and a lot of them moved to Amsterdam because it was a trade center. So there's been Portuguese, Sephardic Jews living in Amsterdam really from the 1500s on. And a few of my relatives are Portuguese Jews, Sephardic Jews. Most of them are not. But there's been a long tradition of tolerance in Amsterdam. Jews have always had a welcome place in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands in general. I learned from my uncle that his older brother, my Uncle Jaap, became bar mitzvah. I didn't really know about that from my mom. Found out about that later. But there was a lot of pride in being Jewish, and pride particularly in the literary traditions and the cultural traditions and history of Judaism that goes back thousands of years. So, there was a strong identity. And after the war, here, I'll show you something else I brought. This is kind of interesting. So after the war, you have all these Jews who are traumatized, and they have to learn to be Jews again. So I brought this. This belonged to one of my cousins. Can you guys read that?
Yeah, but we wouldn't know what it means probably.
Can you say it easily? I'm putting him to the test.
Anachnu sharim lach.
That's right. Anachnu sharim lach. That's right. We sing unto you. Right. So and there's a picture of Israel. So these are all songs that are in Hebrew and Dutch, and they're designed to. This was published after the war to give out to kids, young survivors, to start to understand their Jewish identity again. Here's another one that's also the same. I found these in my dad's things, and they're priceless, right? But these were published to try and some organizations were formed after the war, like Shomer HaTzair, the Young Guard, and Habonim, the Builders. These are like sort of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts versions post-war. So she wanted us to have a Jewish education and so forth and so on, but we didn't belong to a temple. We didn't belong to a shul. We used to go to services at Hillel, part of Harvard University. My sister moved to Israel in '73 when she was 16 or 17, and she just moved there. And lived on a kibbutz, joined the army. The war broke out as soon as she moved there. And my dad said, Malka moves to Israel and a war breaks out. So that was the Yom Kippur War in '73. So there's always been this strain of Jewish identity that's pretty strong. And my dad's side is a whole other story, but he moved here, his family moved here before the war. So whoever perished from his side, I don't know about, or I know very little about. So. And I started studying Hebrew when I was 9 because my sister came home from Israel to visit, and she's speaking a language I didn't understand, and I wanted to be able to speak this language because it was ticking me off. She had all these records, magazines, all this, especially the record, the LPs. She had all this music that was in Hebrew. I didn't understand it, so I told my parents I want to take lessons, so I started studying when I was 9. That's how I got started.
Did your mom face any discrimination once she got to America?
That's a good question. Nothing overt. I think, I don't know if any of you have encountered any kind of comments or sort of discriminatory treatment or what have you. Nothing overt. I think she probably had a few neighbors. I think she encountered a few neighbors who were, anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is, very popular. So, but overtly, no. Overtly, she was able just to live her life and have a family and build a career and, So thankfully not.
We have learned so much about the Holocaust, and it has been so impactful to hear your story personally. Thank you, Andrew, for sharing your mother's story with us.
Welcome.
Thank you for joining us, Greenberg.